Hi, hello everyone, and thanks for joining us for this new museumexpert.org webinar that we called Professional Development or Resistance, or you can say it the other way, Professional Resistance or Professional Development, which is a little bit of a provocative title, or is it not? We'll see. We have three great panelists to help us with that apparent dilemma. First, we have the chance to welcome back Ann Burroughs, who is the president and CEO of the Japanese American National Museum and has been very outspoken regarding the place that museums have or should have in resisting attacks on civil rights, and who will address the state of resistance today, what has happened, and what could or should still be done. To speak about what it means to be a museum professional today and how to build a career, we are lucky to have Jessica Meis, president of the National Emerging Museum Professionals Network, as well as curator at the Batavia Museum, and Melissa Hernandez, curator at the Ventura City Museum, and as well a board member at large at the National Emerging Museum Professional Network. To help us answer our initial question, we have imagined a little different format. After Anne's presentation about the state of resistance, we will put up a poll with three questions that we will ask you to respond very quickly. That is totally anonymous, of course. And after that, we will have the presentation from Melissa and Jessica. We will then comment on the outcomes of the poll later on and also answer your questions. So don't hesitate to put your questions and comments in the chat. We are monitoring them and make sure that we can answer as many of them as possible. So this being said, it's time for Anne to start. And please, Anne, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Walter. It's wonderful to be back. I'm so pleased to be back, and it's so good that so many of you have joined the call. And I really also just want to start off by thanking, all of you for continuing to do this work. I mean, this work in museums is so critical for all of us, which is why we're here. But I'm sort of framing my presentation around three distinct questions, and I'll get to them in a moment. But I think that what I want to start off by doing is just sort of grounding us in a bit of a reality check where I think we are. And of course, understand that it's a subjective perspective and not everybody may share the perspective. But I think that, throughout all of this, I've tried to be as objective as possible. So, I mean, there's no question that since the beginning of 2025 that we've been, our field has not been operating in a neutral or kind environment. We've operated in a climate of deliberate destabilization, marked by the efforts to erase history, to dispute science, to censor knowledge and art, to weaponize funding. We saw that from all of the funding cuts, and certainly to shrink civic space and impose conformity to a narrow ideological vision of the nation. And when we think about our work as being really centered within First Amendment rights, we've certainly come under the attack as those have been threatened. But I think it's important to note that, my museum, the Japanese American National Museum, is a cultural history museum. But it's important to note that, what I'm going to talk about is not by any means just confined to one type of museums. Cultural history museums have been targeted for telling uncomfortable truths and presenting the richness of the diversity of our nation. Science museums have also come under threat for, defending evidence and expertise. Art museums have been scrutinized, particularly those who've, have maintained that voices, bodies, and ideas should be permitted in public spaces, and who've held the line against that. And I would say that across the field, in various ways, the pressure that we felt has been consistent and pretty unmistakable. Some museums have chosen to stay quiet, to stay safe, to stay predictable. And I think that is a choice that we all have to respect. because we all operate in, slightly different immediate ecosystems. But the important thing is that for all of us, in the way that we've responded, we've tried as best as we possibly can to be there for our communities that are under threat. And certainly, for many cities across the country, that fear of the communities under threat has not been abstract. We've seen what happens. We've seen what's happened in Minnesota. We've saw what happened in Los Angeles, cities across our country. We continue to see how terror has stalked the streets of many of our communities. And I think it's tens of thousands of people have been kidnapped, they've been disappeared, they've been incarcerated, they've been deported. And certainly we've seen the killings and the executions as well. So, our communities, the communities that we serve, have been destabilized. And yet people continue to come to museums and to institutions, our institutions, not only for education and culture, but also for reassurance that there is stability, that they're not alone, and that the truth matters, and that their culture matters, and who tells the story, why the stories are told, and why they need to keep being told are important. So there are three questions that I want to sort of center my remarks around. The first is, how did the museum field resist? How have we resisted since the beginning of 2025? What did we miss? And the third thing is, what do we still need to do as a field? So to get to the first question, how did the museum field resist? And I think it really is important that we say very plainly that the field did resist. We resisted in different ways, but we did resist. We didn't resist uniformly. We didn't resist without hesitation. But I do believe that at the end of the day, we did resist as a field in ways that mattered. And it's important also to understand, I think, that resistance doesn't always have to be confrontation. That often resistance can be just having a consistent presence. For many institutions, especially small museums, community-based museums, science centers, and museums in politically hostile environments, simply keeping the doors open, continuing with school programs, paying staff, maintaining exhibitions was not just business as usual. For many of those institutions, it was also an act of extraordinary courage, particularly those museums who were sort of have to exist and operate in hostile environments. Some museums, like my museums, had the luxury of defiance and had the luxury of being able to make a very, very strong stand. And those museums' resistance was also a form of, holding the line on our missions. So, some of you will know, and I think that Colleen is going to post some of the links in the chat, but my museum, the Japanese American National Museum, our trustees issued a statement in the middle of February, literally 2 weeks after the inauguration. And it was an incredibly strong statement in defense of history, civil rights, and democracy. And, our museum is founded to ensure that the history of what happened to Japanese Americans, the incarceration during the Second World War, is never forgotten. But importantly, that it never happens to anybody else. So for our trustees, when they came out with that statement, it was literally during that terrible time when there was that fear and uncertainty, anger and paralysis that we were all feeling. And for our trustees, there was no question. Nobody stood up for Japanese Americans in 1942 when they were incarcerated. And we felt a tremendous obligation to be able to stand up for our museum colleagues who may not have the luxury to do what we're doing, and also as a way to stand up for our community and communities across the country who may be targeted. So for our trustees, there was no question that we needed to stand up. And they charged us with bringing that statement to life in the programming that we've done at our Democracy Center. And if you Google JANM, if you go to our website, you'll get a sense of what we've done. And it's important also to state that we were the first museum in the country to take a strong stand. And actually, for what felt like the longest time, we were one of the only museums to do that. And we've continued, we've continued to be consistent in that voice and to point out how those echoes of history are still enormously relevant today. And we looked at it. We looked at the funding that we would lose, and regardless of what was at stake, our trustees decided to go ahead. So, I would say that the other thing that was also incredibly important for us is that we consider ourselves, and I think all museums do, as being civic hubs of our community. So we also asked ourselves, what does that mean? What does that mean to be a civic hub? What does that mean to be a place of trust? And we know that the field is, museums remain, the most trusted institutions in the country. So what was our obligation in all of that? And many other museums have leaned into that. They've hosted dialogues. When public forums were disappearing, they provided trusted information when misinformation was rampant. And they've also continued to be places of gathering and learning when other civic institutions were withdrawing. So, I also think it's important for us to acknowledge the work that our museum associations have done. Some of them were late to the game. Some of them didn't show up in quite the way we would have wanted them to. But nevertheless, I think they did play a critical role for us. They tracked policy impacts, they translated executive orders into operational consequences, they advocated for the sector, and they also helped to hold the field together when that fragmentation made us the most vulnerable. And I would also say that at the conferences where we've gathered, it's been an extraordinary opportunity to sort of find our own kindred spirits and to create those sort of solidarity circles that have been, so important in the resilience that sustained us. And then to get to my second question, what did we miss? What did the field dismiss? So I think that we have to be honest. We have to be really honest about what we did miss. I think, firstly, we underestimated how quickly and effectively funding would be wielded as a weapon. And we didn't actually anticipate how that would be an intentional strategy to silence us, to paralyze us, to sow uncertainty, and also how that funding would be used to create conformity, to try to create conformity to a very, very narrow ideological agenda. And we weren't prepared for that shift. I also think that we underestimated the depth of paralysis that set in early 2025. There was real fear for our communities, for our staff, for our institutions, for our missions. There was uncertainty about what would trigger retaliation. There was also a sense of waiting for clarity that took a long time, to come. And I think that paralysis in that time and that fear was just a real human action. But what it did mean was that it delayed our collective action, and that weakened us. The third thing I would say is that we didn't adequately name self-censorship or what the consequences of that might have on our field. So, the most common form of censorship is not, I don't believe, what is generally imposed. And we see that, that imposition is there. We see it in, authoritarian regimes across the world. But, much of that censorship was self-imposed. It was internal. So it was the exhibitions that weren't proposed. It was the funding that wasn't applied. The programs that were postponed indefinitely. The language that was softened preemptively. And, we often made these decisions, museums made these decisions out of care for our staff, our institutional survival. But cumulatively, I think that it made us weaker. And I think that finally, we also failed to protect our people in many instances. Too often our individual staff had to absorb the harassment, risk, and the public anger or the public retaliation, without clear institutional policies that backed them and kept them safe. And our staff was sort of almost forced to courage became individualized rather than institutional and structural. And then, the last question that I want to address is, what do we still need to do as a museum field? And, this is something that I think that we all think about a lot. And I think that this is where there is incredible hope and incredible opportunity. So for me, the one lesson from this period was this absolute and complete understanding, not just theoretical, but practical, real-time understanding that museums are not peripheral to democracy. We are part of the civic infrastructure of our communities, of our cities, and of this nation. And civic infrastructure needs to be cared for, it needs to be sustained in order to withstand pressure. So what does that require of us now? So there's several things that I want to itemize. The first is real clarity about who we are and what our responsibility is to our missions. And the first thing is that I think it's an understanding, and we all know this, that museums can never be neutral. We're public institutions with obligations to evidence, to community, and to future generations. So the question is not whether we take positions. The question is the degree to which we abdicate responsibility, potentially through, silence and complicity. Do we continue to apply for federal grants? And I think that is a difficult question for many museums, because there is language in those awards that we have to comply with. And we've decided at JANM that we will not apply for any more federal grants because it's too compromising to our mission. The second thing is that I think that the governance, our boards, have to anticipate that pressure. Our boards must understand that political interference is absolutely real and they need to govern accordingly. So it's things from curatorial independence, staff protection, crisis protocols. They all have to be explicit, not improvised in the moment, and not dependent on individual courage. The next point that I would make is that, financial resilience is also civic resilience. So what does that mean for us? So I think that diversified funding is not just about sustainability. I think that what it comes down to is also about freedom. And I know that it's not easy because we're in different environments. Some museums are well endowed, they have their communities behind them. Smaller museums, it's much, much, much harder. But museums that are structurally fragile, and museums become structurally fragile when we don't have the kind of resources to be able to back the programming and to be able to really lean into our mission. So I think that museums that are structurally fragile are much, much easier to coerce. So what does that mean? So museums that have broad community-rooted support are far harder to silence. So that leads directly into my next point. And I think that one of the things that we need to look at is building coalitions that are wide enough to make the kind of isolation that some of us have felt impossible. We should never have to stand alone. Isolation is a really, really easy tool to use to discipline and to cow and to pick off institutions, to silence institutions, to frame them as exceptions, as outliers. So when memory is attacked, when science is attacked, art, culture, the responsibility to protect that needs to be a collective. So I think that what we need to look at is alignment outside of the museum field. So it's alignment across libraries, archives, schools, universities, unions, professional associations, community organizations, artists, we can go on and on and on. But it's the people who rely on our sector, on our field as civic anchors. So many of us have been in strategic plans where, we talk about our competitive advantage. For us at JANM, a value that I've really led with is this notion of collaborative advantage. We're only stronger when we're not alone. For us, coalition, partnership, it's not optional. It's how civic infrastructure defends itself. And, the last point that I will make here in relation to question 3 is that, by design, museums are part of civic infrastructure. Dialogue, education, public engagement, these are core. These are core to who we are. This is how we serve our communities under stress, how we remain visible, relevant, accountable. And then, finally, I've just got a few closing remarks before I end the segment. And, there's no question that, we've been tested, not only in what we've said, but, how we've showed up. I think that the clarion call is that, democracy is not self-sustaining. Certainly our work at JANM is shaped by the knowledge that democracy has failed and it will continue to fail, quietly, legally, with public consent. That's what happened during and after the Japanese American incarceration. It's also important that solidarity is not something that we should only invoke during a crisis. It's a practice. It's something that we need to build and something that we need to nurture through those relationships, through shared responsibility, and the willingness to stand together when the pressure is applied unevenly. So I think the most important work for us going forward is not about uniformity of voice or approach, but it's about mutual recognition of our shared purpose, our shared vulnerability, and our shared obligation to the public, and how we hold that line together in whatever way we do, because I think that all of us, regardless of what kind of museum we are critical to the infrastructure of our communities, and we also are here. Part of our purpose is to sustain the conditions for a democratic future. So I will leave you with that. Thank you, Walter.
Thank you. I think if we would have been in a room, we would have a standing ovation for this presentation. and thank you for reminding us that that we are part of the museums up. Here it comes. Here we go. So that we are part of the structure of the community and part of that. And so that the solution is not to look at ourselves as one institution, but as part of that community. And it's a two-way thing. We have to serve them so that they help us survive. So thank you so much for that. As I said, we will have now a little poll for our audience here that we ask you to respond to. We have 3 questions. After the 2 first ones relate to the presentation of Anne, and so when we have the results of the poll, then we will ask Anne to quickly comment on that, and then we will go to the next presentation. Please go ahead and make sure to fill in the poll. Yeah, I think that we have everyone possibly has answered that question here. Can we share the results? So Anne, do you see the results here from this first question? So do you have any thoughts about that? I don't hear you. You are muted, Anne.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'm sorry about that.
Yes.
Obviously the results are mixed. But it's interesting to me to see how um it's interesting for me to see the range. The range, it would also be really good to know where people are coming from. But of course, I mean, what, geographic location folks were coming from. But, I think that the key takeaway from what I see this is that, to some extent or another, the executive orders have affected folks, but not equally and not in the same way. But I think when I see this, it feels to me as though they have shaped the environment in which we're working. And I think that we should acknowledge what these impacts are openly. And it's important for us, as I said earlier on, that, we support staff as they, navigate the visible and sort of invisible changes that are taking place.
Indeed, yes. So the second question, if you scroll down, is about the preparedness about regarding ICE intervention. So here is the result. Can you see that?
When I look at this, so, changing the culture of the climate, I think is, such an important thing. What's interesting here is also just the sort of uneven preparedness across the field. Obviously we know that some museums have, clear policies and trainings, whereas others don't. So the key thing for me is that when there is no clear guidance, the burden then falls on individual staff, on frontline staff, have to make difficult decisions in real time without, the training and support. But what I would say at the end of it is that, we can't ignore this issue. We're trusted public spaces. We have an obligation and a responsibility to think about this and respond ways that, reflect our values, that protect our culture, and also our legal responsibility and our care for our communities. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you. And so it's remarkable that actually here more than 40% say that the topic has not been discussed in the institution at all. I mean, this is a large number, I feel. So the third question will be commented during the presentation of our next speakers or after. So I suggest that we now stop sharing and that we will go to Jessica and Melissa for their presentation of the state of the work as a professional in museums right now. So please, Jessica and Mrs. Melissa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Walter. Thank you, Anne, too, as well as sharing your presentation. We feel very honored to be a part of this presentation as we kind of talk about like the realities from resistance to also like career development. So a little bit of intro about us. My name is Jessica Meis. I am the president of the National Emerging Museum Professionals Network. We're a nonprofit fun group of emerging museum professionals and other people at all levels, creating a community of practice for EMPs to be supported, as well as advocating for forward-thinking and ethical museum work. Outside of NEMPN, I'm also a curator at the Batavia Depot Museum in Batavia, Illinois, and I'm very happy to be here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Melissa Pankuchi-Hernandez. I'm a little newer to NEMPN. I've been a board member at large since this past July, so very glad to be a part of this community and this panel today. Outside of NEMPN, I am the new exhibitions curator of history at the Museum of Ventura County in California. And yeah, very excited to get to chat with Jess today.
So show of hands or reactions. Has anyone heard about NEMPN? I'll let a couple minutes go by. We've got some stuff in the chat and some hearts. Wonderful to hear. So as I said, we're a nonprofit. We're a registered 501(c)(3). We were started in the early 2000s as a affinity group for EMPs to support one another as they're growing their careers, but also lending a hand to the next generation as they're entering the field. We support everyone. We don't have a definition of EMPs. We are also a free member organization, so we try to provide our services at free or very low cost if we ever have charging for things. In terms of advocacy, we really advocate for frontline worker conditions, salary transparency. We advocate against unpaid internships and like the importance of paid labor, but also try to have a community of practice that everyone feels supported in. We do this through regular webinars or events, and we also have a Discord channel. So if anyone's interested in joining our Discord, it's a different social media platform, but it's really been a great way to have a digital community outside of traditional like Facebook or Instagram resources. So a little bit about who are EMPs and like who is our community that we serve primarily. As I said, we let people self-define it, but it's usually within someone's first 10 years of their career. But this can also be including individuals who have transitioned, so maybe K through 12 teachers or paralegals who are having a second career from early, as well as early students. A lot of EMPs participate in part-time or gig work, maybe have only been able to have a volunteer position and are still looking for a full-time paid position. We pulled our NEMPM membership back in 2023, and about 66% of our community had a master's degree or higher, and about 25% had a bachelor's degree. EMPs in the workforce are wanting salary transparency, spaces that have a work-life balance or are able to have empathy towards their workers. But also, there's so much uncertainty in the field right now, we're seeing with a lot of our membership. So I don't know,
Absolutely.
Melissa, if you have other things that I might have missed about like what we're seeing in terms of some of the realities our membership just EMPs in general are facing.
Absolutely. One of the things I know I've heard from colleagues that I also experienced coming up when I was in graduate school, trying to get placed for internships. I was in New York City at the time, and I had to cobble together multiple internships at the same time so I could kind of create my own paid internship. I had one that paid for my subway card, so I could have that covered for the month, which let me have the internship I really wanted. That was 3 days a week. That was totally unpaid. Um, combining that with working front in a gallery, just kind of standing, observing things at Christie's, kind of trying to cobble together all of these different experiences that could still be tangentially in the field, but could also help me pay for my groceries and my rent at the same
Mhm.
time. And that's an experience I think a lot of us are having is having trouble, finding these paid experiences or being able to get our foot in the door in these spaces. Even if we have a wealth of experience, a lot of us are coming out of programs. Some of us have a wealth of experience in the field already without those, graduate degrees or bachelor's degrees. So I think there's just a big, everyone's having a tough time. I'm someone that started in a new position recently as well and trying to navigate. I know we kind of talked about this as we were preparing for this talk, trying to apply for a different job while not burning out at your current one that may be the whole reason that you're leaving. Just having to find that balance is really tough. I don't know, Jess, what about you? Have you had that experience? What are you hearing from our members?
Yeah. And I'm happy to share my personal experience. I started out working for a Unitarian church, and so that's kind of I found a little way into the door working through nonprofits. So we're seeing some of our membership working for very tangential nonprofit careers with their local Main Street or other archives. Who want to be working in museums but are kind of finding that other step along the way. I feel like another part of that seeking the job process is sometimes opaque hiring practices. So we
Yeah.
have a lot of uncertainty or like people reading my cover letter. Are employers going to be using AI to look through my thing? Is it worth me using AI to write a cover letter? We're getting a lot of those questions too. Something we're trying to work with through NEMPN is also the uncertainty of funding. So Anne talked about a little bit ago about how funding has been weaponized against museums and other nonprofits. And so as people entering the field, it kind of is uncertain if my museum will have the funding to potentially pay me into the future. So NEMPN hosted a workshop on reading Museum's 990s and kind of analyzing where that funding is coming from and doing that little bit of extra research that we might have not had to do 10 years ago. Another thing I'm kind of seeing on like the frontline workers aspect is museum workers being a public figure. I've heard instances of people having to talk with the public who are kind of having polarizing opinions and kind of not having that background training of what to do and respond in a customer service way, or someone having their social media presence scrutinized by the public and having it addressed and potentially affecting their job. Um, I th yeah, I think that too, operationally, we have lots of very impassioned museum professionals starting out, and we kind of have a lot of work on our shoulders too. We have lots of museums who have been around for a long time, lots of small museums, and they are working on kind of either overcoming founder syndrome or kind of not having really great employees who were there with them for decades that had an entire wealth of institutional knowledge, but unfortunately not all of that stuff was written down. So something I do on a regular basis too is writing standards of practice. So that's something I've kind of gotten a lot more training on personally as I'm trying to kind of set up my institution for the next few generations.
I think too, a thing I've experienced, and I know some of the people on the call I'm sure have experienced as well, is when you're trying to write those processes down or maybe implement a new process, having a little bit of pushback on those kinds of experiences. When you're trying to formalize something, I've had the great opportunities to work at institutions that were run by very passionate people that maybe didn't come with that kind of strategic, process mindset. So even trying to get their current process down on paper could be a little tricky. I think we're lucky in that, we've experienced with NEMPN, and we know there are other professionals out there that are so passionate about this work. So getting that pushback could be kind of discouraging sometimes as well. It's important work, but as we all know, it's very hard.
If you haven't told or could tell, Melissa and I both work in collections, and so that's an area I feel like we kind of dealing with this on a regular basis. But it's something
Absolutely.
also that like I'm always trying to find new ways to have professional development training. So I'm excited to talk about that in a little bit.
Yes.
But I think I'll move on to like what gives us hope for the field. I think I'll start out and just like Anne had talked about the importance of in by working together and having solidarity with others with like outside of your institution, either at peer museums or other organizations like museum associations, there is an advantage to collaboration. So I feel it definitely within our NEMPN community. We had our first committee meeting, and it just was kind of like a little spark of hope that we're going into the year a little bit with a little bit more juice in our tank to kind of tackle these issues in the field.
Absolutely.
What about you, Melissa?
Yeah, I've got two things. The first, if I can sneak in a plug for ourselves, um, things that bring me hope. Leaving our committee meeting the other day and thinking about Museum Workers Advocacy Day this year, if I could share a little bit about that. Now, our theme this year is about broadening horizons, which is so exciting, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Museum Workers Advocacy Day is an annual event that takes place digitally. This year, it's going to be April 9th and 10th. We'll be releasing more information soon, so we hope you all will be able to join us. It helps us provide a platform for EMPs and other museum professionals to come together, advocate for industry changes, but we are also hoping it's inspiring leaders to make more equitable and accessible workspaces for us all. We have some really exciting panels this year, so I hope you'll be able to join us. We're also looking for moderators for our event. So if any of you are interested in that, please reach out to us. I know we're going to share some resources at the end. So that is very inspiring to me. I know Anne mentioned those, like you said, finding kindred spirits. I wrote down when she was talking. I thought was such a great phrase. And that is what NEMPN and I think Museum Workers Advocacy Day can do for our community. But also inspiring to me that Anne mentioned as well as institutions that are currently advocating, for an accurate portrayal of history. I know Anne's institution is that. I'm grateful to currently work at one as well. Be a good learning space for the community, for people to come together and realize that history isn't always pretty, and we should, be accurate in our telling of those stories and find ways that we can move forward as communities together. It's really inspiring to hear about places across the nation that are kind of working towards those goals.
Yeah, totally agree. I definitely wrote down like a note about trust too. I know
Yes.
Susie Wilkening does like the museum visitor survey on an annual basis, and like museums are still one of the most trustworthy sources for the public for information. So that does give me hope that like we'll reach the audience that really wants to hear what we're doing. So kind of going to end it on some of the resources that we use personally for skill development or professional development or networking. I think you guys all being in this webinar is kind of the first step. NEMPN and museumexpert.org offer free webinars like this to kind of grow your skills. A couple other of my favorites are also getting involved with regional associations. So I started volunteering with the Midwest Museums Association conference. And that was a great way for me to meet other people, but then potentially get free admission to conference too by helping out on the volunteer side. I also, for very skill-based sessions, there's a lot of really cool creators out there who are doing consultant work. They're ex-museum professionals who are just wanting to share what they do with the public and kind of use webinars as a way to get more customers in the door. And so those kind of the ones that come to mind are Gaylord Archival, Backlog, the FAIC's Connecting to Collections Care, as well as the Northeast Document Conservation Center. So those are my big ones, and I'm happy to drop the links in the chat because I didn't share them with Colleen. I'm sorry. But Melissa, do you have any other resources that you would love to share?
I really just want to encourage everyone. These are this type of like skill development, and it is something we're constantly thinking about at NEMPN. So if anyone, again, sorry, a small plug for our Discord, we'd love to hear your ideas, the resources that you find important. We'd love to be able to partner further on programming for these kinds of things. So just we're a group, and there are so many groups like museumexpert.org that want to hear from our community.
Yeah, I feel like whenever we have a circle of professionals, like everyone has a talent that they can share, and if anyone's willing to share it, your voice would definitely be appreciated.
Especially in a time, I know in the poll, everyone was saying limited time and funding for these kinds of things. I was previously at an institution where we all kind of had to make a pitch to go to ARCS because there were 6 of us, but only 3 people could fit in the budget. We want to make sure that we can make those resources available to people that maybe can't get to those conferences, can't get to those larger events that cost time and money.
Yeah. I think too, I'll just kind of end on this, but like I love the museum community. Whenever I go to a museum conference, it is nice to find those people who have a kindred spirit. And usually they're very nice to meet and like happy to network and like share their resources. And so another thing we do at NEMPN is encourage the emerging museum professionals to kind of reach out. So if you're someone who's been in the field, if someone ever reaches out for an informational interview, we just hope that you're willing to impart your knowledge for a few minutes. But I think with that, thank you guys very much. Happy to
Thank you,
answer
everybody.
questions.
Thank you, and somehow you have responded to the question as well. But Jessica, could you maybe comment on the third question in the poll in a more direct way?
Yeah.
Then I must say I appreciate the way that you have played on each other to make this presentation. Thank you for that format.
Yeah.
But please, if you could comment on that
Yeah.
that question first, yeah.
Colleen, do you mind bringing back up the results? Because I remember a lot of folks said that time and funding was a big issue. Um, yeah, definitely time and funding. Everyone's budgets are tight, and kind of like choosing which is the best one is really hard.
Mhm.
I definitely use to make the case. I kind of ask peers. I was like, "Hey, have you been to this conference, or have you participated in this thing?" Um, Definitely through volunteer opportunities, either through the programming committees or other planning committees. There's a lot that has that goes into creating a conference and making it successful. So definitely getting involved with that. I would say too, the second one about not not unsure of like which is the best one to participate in. Definitely hard to see. I know at NEMPN we try to share recommended professional development courses, or like here's a webinar recording that was really helpful. It's kind of a chance for professionals to kind of advocate for themselves, or maybe like set out an hour of their time each quarter to kind of take a new class. I'm not the best sometimes at at time management, so definitely finding the time for that is hard. But also, if you have leadership, or if you are a leader yourself, making sure that you know the importance of professional development for your team. So, if you're ever in a capacity that you over supervise folks, like trying to also write that into the job duties, that staying up in the field, staying not only like connected and networked, but also still growing your field, growing your skills is also important.
I think too, I'd encourage everyone, a lot of times for conferences, there are scholarships related either to actual attendance fees or for your travel. Travel was always a big one for institutions I worked at. Um, we get lucky. I am based in Los Angeles at the moment, so I get lucky that sometimes those conferences come around. But those travel scholarships can be really helpful. And usually you'll have to write like a small paragraph of what you learned in a session, and there's a wealth to choose from once you can get in the door. So I'd encourage everyone, as long as what Jess is saying, finding which one exactly will work best for you, to look into those scholarships, or even ask if something like that might be available.
I would say too, a practice that I've started in my own professional work is to start a portfolio. If you haven't done that already, whenever you have opportunities to apply for a scholarship, or try to make the case to your boss that you want to build your skill in this, having a dedicated portfolio for the work you've already done makes both of those things a little bit easier.
And I wanted to call out in the chat, Haley and Nicole have been having a great conversation about like where you can place this on your resume, or if you should do that. One of the things I do, I keep that in kind of my document for end of the year review, development workshops or webinars like this one. But Haley said that she has a section on her resume called professional development where she lists these things. And I think that could be great as well when applying for jobs, showing that you're involved, that you're active and thinking about professional development. Um, Putting that to paper in that way is a lot more exciting than just having a bullet point that says,
Mhm.
I seek this out. So great thoughts, Haley and Nicole.
Thank you. So thank you for this context on this question. Colleen, you have been monitoring the questions in the chat and the remarks. Is there any question or remark that stands out that you would like to share with one of the panelists?
Well, and Anne, thank you so much for adding some answers into the chat. That was really lovely. I was wondering if maybe you could expand a little bit on Michael's question about Janum's appeals to members and donors in light of your decision to not take federal funding, and really the kinds of responses you're getting locally and nationally when it comes to gifts and memberships in that regard.
Uh, Thanks, Colleen, and thank you, Michael, for that question. We I think that when we were quite public in our position, and because as I said earlier on, we were the only museum for quite some time, that was sort of coming out publicly with this. And when we had the first notice of funding rescinded, it was for a landmarks grant from the NEH, and that was to fund an amazingly vibrant summer program where we brought 70 teachers from around the country to come to Little Tokyo in Los Angeles into the museum. So we went public with that, and the chair of our board actually went on on national television, and said that, spoke about it and how outrageous it was, and, said very publicly that we absolutely refuse to comply with anything, and, said Janum will scrub nothing, which is, almost in a sense become a meme. And it was interesting because we had such an outpouring from that, from people, from all over the country, people who are not members, who we've had no relationship with, literally small donations from, $5 up to the very larger ones. And, when we look at, what's happened over the course of this year, we were able to very, very comfortably complete a comprehensive campaign. So we hit our goal of 85 million, and it accelerated, over the course of this year. We were also just extraordinarily fortunate to receive a second gift from Mackenzie Scott. So the second gift was for 20 million, and there's no question that part of the impetus for that was because of the impact that we've had. And then also, just as the year was progressing, we got very, very significant gifts. And so, I can say that it's that thing, when you build it, people will come. And I think that it wasn't easy. It wasn't always easy for us, but we were prepared for this. We have at Janum, one of our most robust programs is our National Center for the Preservation of Democracy. So it's given us this platform, to lean into these issues really, really loudly with, incredibly strong programming. When our plaza was invaded by Customs and Border Patrol agents, 75 armed and masked agents, because we were hosting the governor of California here at our Democracy Center, that also sparked, an enormous amount of support. And then we were also at the sort of, the epicenter of the protests in Los Angeles and the militarization of our city. And, we spoke out incredibly strongly about the need to protect our communities and to stand up for First Amendment rights, and for, to stand up to protect the freedom of protest. So, it's a long answer to say that, it was unequivocal for us. We leaned into what we believed was our mission, protecting the integrity of our mission, and our institution. And, the outpouring and the support has really been quite remarkable.
Colleen, are there other questions that you would like to bring to the attention of our panelists, or?
Yeah. First, I think I speak for everyone in the chat when we say that Anne Janum has been a role model and an inspiration to the museum field, and we thank you. Marcia did have a follow-up question. How can museums practically and as a priority devote time, people, and other resources to truly be part of the broader civic ecosystems? Although there's a lot of talk about partnerships, many museums and their boards still focus on the individual museum and its missions and programs. We still, in my view, give too much lip service to our civic engagement responsibilities. Do you have any thoughts for the group on that?
I'm happy to add a little bit. I know something that I do actively within my museum and region is try to reach out to other professionals at other peer institutions just to connect on a personal level. But that has been really fruitful to do kind of more collaborative engagement, either through programming or kind of that intentional like planning as we're like involved with the community.
So Colleen, if you don't mind, we are close to the end of the hour here, and I would like to come back and very briefly ask each of Jessica and Anne to answer the question: professional development or resistance? How would you respond to that, Jessica? You're on the screen, so you go ahead first.
It's so hard.
Mhm.
I think both can exist together. Um, I think as someone very early on in the career, I have a little bit more focus on that professional development side. So I am a little bit more protective of what I might do as an individual. But I really admire being able to participate in any NEMPM and kind of do some of that more resistance work out on a personal and kind of make time outside of my full-time job to do.
Mm.
So I think you can have both worlds, but it's definitely a thoughtful process.
And how do you see that? And if there is a connection between the two, what can be changed to professional development to make it more able to give people the chance to resist?
I think that I think that Jessica's absolutely right. The two are so I mean, I think that they are so linked. Um, I would also say that in the environment that we're in now, and if we take our role as, being civic hubs incredibly importantly, and if we take our role as being sort of actors as part of the collaboration and building that solidarity, there's also a different way to look at professional development. And I think that that is something that we as the field should be looking at. And, certainly for us at JANM, that's a value that we really do lean into. And, as I said earlier on, for us, the issue of collaborative advantage is absolutely key to what we do. So in the professional development work that we do with our folks and the discussions that we have internally, that's very, very much a critical piece of that. Because if you're going to do your work as a museum professional really well, you have to understand what your community is, and you have to understand what your value is, both as a museum professional and as somebody who's embedded in an institution.
Thank you so much for that, and you actually express exactly what my thoughts are on this issue, and we with Museum Expert we like to go more in depth with that, what that practically mean to organize professional development so that museums play that role of civic engagement within their community in a better way in the future, based on the experiences that we just have recently in the month. And so next month, for those who are here, and we certainly will communicate on that. We will try to have a conversation with people exactly on that topic. It will not be a webinar, but we will invite people to join us in the thinking about how can we actually work on professional development so that we address these new challenges coming out of this last month. So thank you all the speakers for their inspiring contributions today. Thanks to Colleen again for doing all the work behind the scenes. Thanks to the whole museum expert team to make this all possible, and thanks to the audience, of course, who is so how do you say that, the fidelity of the people coming to our webinars every single month. We could not do it without you. So thank you all, and have a great day.
Thank you, Walter. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Melissa and Jessica.
Thank you as well, Anne.
Thank
Except
you.
such a great conversation.
A true pleasure.